Let's be reasonable, okay? What is Ukraine, like Iran? Well, let's go through the broadcast manual that has already been thoroughly made for the president's use in a comprehensive manner. So, the Kuchma game. Create oligarchs, corrupt officials, oppose them to nationalists, or make them friends with nationalists. Somehow try to maintain balance to carry out projects for transforming Ukraine in a unified state. There's also a game with Russia. In energy resources, such as in nuclear matters, in many aspects, what's at stake? Industry, military-industrial complex, technology, science, intellect, they are trying to preserve. They are trying, but it's not going well. Well, something can be added. What to migrate?
I would remove the nationalists because they were not a problem for him. They were absolutely and entirely manageable in every possible way. And it was because Chernobyl himself did not want to take power. When there was such an opportunity, he left before that.
Take note of this. Exactly.
Yes.
He maintained balance. Or rather, the situation still allowed him to maintain balance. Yushchenko's game. To lean towards the nationalists, let himself be outplayed by the oligarch, create a circle of any friends, like the dominance of corruption and the destruction of solidarity. Exactly this very moment. And what about the destruction of relations with Russia? That is under Yushchenko for the first time. Normal working relations with Russia, which Kuchma maintained, are collapsing. What happened before?
There is a specific date when this happened. Definitively and irrevocably. Well, for the current moment. It was the moment when Putin came to Ukraine to negotiate about the gas transportation system and the creation of a consortium in 2005. And Yushchenko said no. That is, a consortium was supposed to be created consisting of Gazprom, Naftogaz, and, well, in Germany, I know whatever they call it there. And the issue of the pipeline was supposed to be resolved. Yushchenko refused, and after that, in 2006, the decision regarding the Nord Streams was made. That was a significant turning point in the history of modern relations, a truly historical moment.
That something new arises. Yushchenko bets on resentment and generates Russophobia. All of this happened under him. It all arises under him. Industry, FPC, the science of intellect are taken off the agenda. That is, under Yushchenko, it becomes clear that none of this will happen.
And look, in the economy, there is an opening up of the economy. Well, opening up in the sense that transnational capital enters, and they start to create and shape the rules of the game for themselves using lobbying tools like Our Ukraine and so on. Later, under Poroshenko, they did this as well accordingly. And Ukraine, as it were, begins to be exploited. Conditions are created for everyone to exploit Ukraine, including the Russians, because the Russians are already starting.
Yanukovych will lean towards Russia, allowing Russia to destroy industry, military-industrial complex, and science. In other words, Yanukovych is simply continuing Yushchenko's game, in some sense, but now in Russia's interests to steal and flee to Russia. This is how President Yanukovych will be remembered in history. Yushchenko and Yanukovych create a pendulum of pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian tribalism. So, after them, look, Yushchenko, well, you could say Kuchma somehow maintains the balance of Yushchenko. Ukraine, Yanukovych, Russia, Poroshenko, Ukraine. And so inevitably the pendulum begins. Look, at this moment, the game, Poroshenko. After the Brazilian Yanukovych, it's clear about the pro-Ukrainian Poroshenko. Pretending to be a patriot, trying to conduct business and war with Russia, using business for war and war for business. Poroshenko is much more dangerous for Ukraine than Yanukovych. Yanukovych was able to unite Ukrainians against himself and thereby create quasi-solidarity. However, Yanukovych clearly acted as an enemy of Ukraine. And well, he already fled to Russia. Poroshenko also managed to unite Ukrainians against himself, but managed to hold on as one of their own for the national patriots. This paradox led to the split of Ukraine already within the large-scale war of 1922. That's kind of his game. Poroshenko's solidarity of Ukraine has ended. He divided society, effectively finished off the military-industrial complex with a stockpile of ammunition before the war. So indeed, this is his game. Whether he did it intentionally, out of stupidity, because he was a profiteer, or because he didn't understand. These are all secondary questions. The essence of the game is in this. You can justify, perhaps comment, raise objections, criticize.
I agree. I agree that in essence, look, in reality, then they all used, starting with Yushchenko, they all used these pendulum themes as a screen to actually cut up the economy, to divide and manipulate the political and economic landscape for their own benefits and interests, and exploit the resources and wealth of the nation for their own personal gain and power consolidation, while neglecting the needs and aspirations of the people. Assets among their own, This is indeed the phenomenon of the three scams, as I mentioned. This is the third scam by the Ukrainian elite, who actually started this game of NATO integration into the EU. It was all indeed in quotes, because in reality, no European integration or Euro-Atlantic integration was actually taking place. That is, they were passing some laws, and these laws were complicating the existing ones. Laws, yes. And as a result, it was an endless stagnation, so to speak. And at the same time, all those factors that have now become apparent to the majority of Ukrainian citizens were completely ignored, such as the fact that Germany is not ready to accept them. For one set of reasons, the Netherlands for another, the States for a third, France for a fourth, and so on and so on and so on. And it turned out that this whole bold maneuver, which began in 2004, with good and clearly defined goals, that we should ultimately become part of this Euro-Atlantic European community, in the end, unfortunately, ends up being a flop because...
Yes, and then there's this whole constitution mess.
It ends up being a flop because it turned out that the flop was the Senate, that the problems turned out to be of the European Union.
NATO and the EU, and many things seem to be ours.
All this at the expense of the actual and tangible price, the genuine and authentic life, real economy, collapsed assets, industry, and the rest of the education system, which we paid for the illusion and the ever-increasing costs associated with it, which was maintained in a strategic manner so that the privileged elite could simply carve up what they got after the Soviet era. And the pinnacle of this illusion was truly Schuster. And the hustle of space and hustle, I'm not talking about the person, I'm not talking about Savik, I'm talking about hustle as informational jokes